Welcome to the most woeful of all podcasts, Woeful Wednesday. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan. Um, My dear brother, I am taking a great risk in hiding a message to you inside one of my podcasts, but I am certain that even the most melancholy and well-YouTubed people in the world have found my critique of the lives of the three Baudelaire children even more wretched than I promised. And so this podcast will stay on the unrecommended, unviewed category of YouTube videos, utterly ignored, waiting for you to open it and find this message.
Oh, sorry. Did you say something?
Well, so much for that strategy. Hello, and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And if you did not catch that, you have not done the readings for the week because that is essentially a riff on the secret letter that Lemony Snicket has written to his sister, where it's like, oh, if I just write such awful books, then people will skip over this stuff, especially towards the end of the chapter. If I just insist, don't keep reading, then they'll just stop reading the chapter, just go on to the next part, and they'll miss the secret letter to his sister.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. It is a very interesting part of the book.
It is.
Yeah, part of the series in general, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
this is the most overt reference that we get to it,
yeah.
at least
Yeah.
up until this point. So anyway, if you are new to the series, then we are reading through all of the books in a series of unfortunate events, all 13 of them. We are on book the 10th, The Slippery Slope, and we're doing 3 videos for each book. So we are in the middle chapters for this one, chapters 5 to 8, and then next week we'll be getting into chapters 9 to 13.
hmm Yeah. And I understand that we do have a sponsor for this week's episode.
We do, thankfully, because we need somebody to be, supporting us financially. So we've got great sponsors, though. All right, so we need to thank our good friends over at Vertical Flame Diversion. Are you tired of your candles at home burning horizontally instead of burning vertically? And you're looking at the flame and you're saying, why don't you just burn vertically? And it just won't, right? I mean, I think we've all been there. We've got those defective candles, and
Yeah.
seems impossible to fix, especially if you're trying to have a nice romantic evening with somebody that you're interested in, and the stupid candle is burning sideways instead of burning vertically. Well,
Yep.
you need to get yourself a vertical flame diversion. It is a wonderful new product, and what it's going to do is you're going to insert it on the top of your candle, and it's going to direct the flame upwards because we need. Um, Sometimes we just need tools like that to
Yeah.
to fix these inferior candles.
Absolutely. I know. It is I mean, talk about reasons I'm single. That is definitely up there. Candles
Exactly.
burning sideways.
Ew, is that a horizontal burning flame? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
How many
Happened one
dates
too
have
many times.
yeah. I stopped counting. Well, good thing we've got this product now. So hopefully they send us some free samples so that way you can start using them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are talking about the middle chapters, chapters 5 to 8 in book the 10th, The Slippery Slope. And Tyler, you have got plot summary duty for the week.
Yes, and these are very busy chapters. Lots going on here as Violet and Klaus. I almost said the Baudelaires, but it's not all of the Baudelaires. Violet and Klaus are traveling with this masked person
Uh-huh.
up the vertical
Well, the
flame
sweatered
diversion.
boy.
Right.
That's how
Yes,
he gets described more than the masked person, because everybody's wearing a mask, but I guess not
that's true.
everybody's wearing a sweater. So
Yes.
the sweatered boy.
Yes, so they are climbing up the vertical flame diversion, which is essentially a chimney.
Also a
And
device for fixing defective candles.
right, yes, of course. Yeah, don't get those two confused. Yes, and so they reach the top. They get through this door, which is a vocabulary-based puzzle, which
Yeah.
leads them to the inside of VFD headquarters.
What would
And
be the inside?
right, what would be the inside, but of course, it has been burned down.
Hmm.
And as we, the readers, know, because of chapter seven, seven, right? I think that's when we discuss Sunny
Uh-huh.
and her adventures.
Yeah.
Um, then there are two other new additions to the universe here. There is the the man with a beard but no hair,
Yes.
and the woman with hair but no beard.
Very
And that
strange for
is
a woman.
right. They're such fun descriptions, honestly.
Yes.
I'm not
Yeah.
even mad about it. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm fine with it.
Um, yes, and so those two apparently deserve some respect from Olaf, and they
Yeah, they're frightening individuals. How,
mhm.
how do we know that they're frightening individuals? Because Lemony Snicket tells us explicitly these are very frightening individuals. Okay.
Yes. Yep, they do indeed have an aura of villainy, I believe
Yeah.
is how he describes
Yes. That
it.
everybody senses just, essentially in The Lion King, just the name alone, Mufasa. Ooh. Mufasa, Mufasa, Mufasa. Ooh.
Yes. Yes. So those two burned down VFD headquarters a little bit at a time, which Violet and Klaus discover is in an attempt to mask the fact that it has been burned down, apparently, create less smoke at a time. Um,
Sure.
and the masked boy, the sweatered individual,
Uh-huh.
um, removes his mask and reveals to the Baudelaires that he is Quigley
Yes.
Quagmire,
Yes.
the third triplet who did not burn in a fire, and that seems to be what the Snicket file is
Mm.
referencing when it says that there was a survivor of the fire,
Yes.
which is disappointing, of course, to the Baudelaires.
Yeah.
And they have
It's like,
so many
oh,
questions.
you survived the fire, so you're the survivor. Great.
Yeah. No offense, but I was hoping you were my mom.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so they have quite a discussion about all the events that have transpired with both of them. Quigley goes on a yeah, he describes everything that's happened to him. He says that there was a secret passage which connected the Quagmire house to Uncle Monty's house, um, which was, of course, seen in the reptile room. Um, and yeah, and Jacques Snicket had some role in all of this, and wanted Quigley to stay hidden
Mm,
for some purpose. And yeah, Quigley has been trying to reunite with his siblings for quite a while, but has failed to do so.
hmm
Um, I think I'm going to cut it off there. There's so much that happens in these chapters, but
I mean, there's so much that gets described. These books
yes.
do really interesting things because I feel like it's so overt that I can't imagine that this is anything other than like a rejection of every piece of writing advice out there, which is, you know, show, don't tell.
Right.
And this is just tell, 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 no showing. Just
Yes. Yeah.
Quigley is just dumping. This is a huge info dump of
Yeah.
just saying, here's everything that you need to know about what's happened with me. None of it is dramatized because
Right.
that's really what show don't tell means. It means like actually dramatize what's happening and
Yeah.
let it get revealed through plot and through story, not just a character just sitting or standing there saying, let me now go on a monologue for 5, 10 minutes at a stretch telling you all of the backstory.
Yes. Well, of course, he is constantly interrupted by Violet and Klaus,
He
who
is.
are refreshing us on what has happened to them over the
Yes.
past 10 books.
Yeah, it almost
Even though Quigley keeps saying, yeah, I know all about you guys.
right. Yeah, and that's where I'm saying that it seems just like such an overt instance of what people would say not to do in
Right.
writing,
Yeah.
that it almost feels aggressive at this point. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? It almost feels like Handler is just saying, "What about this rule? You want me to follow this one? No!" And then he just completely ignores it, like what we saw in the last discussion last week, where we were talking about the chapter with Sunny, and then an editor presumably telling him, "You can't have a chapter with Sunny. You need to stick with all three Baudelaires, and if it ends up being that they're separated, then you can only have a chapter where you focus on 2/3 of them." And
Right.
he's rejecting it and rejecting it. At least from my perspective, that's what's happening here.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I would have appreciated a full chapter that just talked about Quigley's adventures.
Yes.
But instead, then we just get Quigley telling us what happened to
Uh
him
huh.
rather than Lemony Snicket describing what happened to him.
Yes.
And of course, Lemony Snicket says that he hasn't done as much research on the Quagmires, so he doesn't know, even though he's written down what Quigley
Uh huh.
said.
Yep. If he was a writer, then he could have dramatized all of those
Yep.
things that Quigley just said there. But uh, yeah, it's absolutely it. I'm glad that you said that, because that would make the most sense, would it not? To just have a
Yeah.
whole chapter devoted to Quigley. But the problem is he's already set himself up where his point of view is tied to the Baudelaires. So he
Hmm.
can't give us events that happen to other characters unless the Baudelaires are there. So how do we get to know Quigley's backstory? Well, he tells it directly to the Baudelaires. And um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a frustrating thing when it comes to point of view. I feel like when issues surrounding point of view get to that place where it's restricting your ability to tell the story, I don't see why it's such a big deal
Yeah.
to start shifting your point of view.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of the reasons why I think for a lot of people, then I think they actually prefer the Netflix series
Mm,
over the books because it's able to do a lot more because it isn't locked down to just following the Baudelaires. So you do get some quite a few sequences without them.
yeah.
Um, and so it works really well in the series, but it is writing for a different medium. And I appreciate that they actually did adapt it instead of just
Right.
saying, okay,
Right.
these are the events, let's put them on screen.
Right. I guess I'm just saying though that you can even shift it within a series. That editors will say that you can't, but if you look at the Jack Reacher novels by Lee Child, then I don't know how many he's published at this point. It's got to be close to 20. But he famously or infamously changed the point of view where originally, I forget what it was. I think originally the stories were in third person narration, and then they became first person, or it went the other way. It went first person, and so you're just reading a certain number of books, and it's like Jack does this and blah blah blah, and then it starts out with I woke up and I did this. Like, I'm not kidding. That literally. So I'm going, well, and like,
Okay.
and people continue to buy those books. They remain incredibly popular, even with
Right.
films now starring Tom Cruise. So I'm going,
Yeah.
like, editors, people in publishing, obviously you can shift point of view partway through a series, and people
Yeah.
will follow along. This whole idea though of you can't change it. I just anytime I hear a rule like that, I go, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's one of those things that it's a great rule for beginning writers, but
Yes,
you
yes,
know, once you understand why the rule is in place, then you know when it's okay to break that rule.
100%. You got it.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, I guess let's get into the actual chapters then.
Hmm.
So I might as well go first with chapter 5 since you just did the plot summary. So starting on page 95 and going over to page 96, then it's an interesting little discussion that you have towards the bottom of 95 into 96, where this is Klaus speaking to, I'm pretty sure it's to Quigley, but we don't know that it's Quigley at this point.
Yeah.
Then, like, because Quigley uses the word xenial
Right.
Um, uh, so anyway, it goes, Xenial is a word which refers to the giving of gifts to a stranger. He's right, Klaus murmured to his sister. I know that having a good vocabulary doesn't guarantee that I'm a good person, the boy said, but it does mean I've read a great deal. And in my experience, well read people are less likely to be evil. And then, they kind of look at each other and they consider the question. Uh, and Snicket continues, there are, of course, plenty of evil people who have read a great many books and plenty of very kind people who seem to have found some other method of spending their time. But the Baudelaires knew that there was a kind of truth to the boy's statement, and they had to admit that they preferred to take their chances with a stranger who knew what the word Xenial meant, rather than exiting the cave and trying to find the headquarters all by themselves. And so, I mean, I've commented on this many times before, but I don't know how much of it I've talked about on the actual podcast. But I mean, a lot of people will comment who are within the BookTube community that BookTube is a fairly strange online community and a fairly it's an outlier in terms of the decorum, the level of respect and tolerance for other people's views, and just the civility that you find on BookTube. There's still plenty of drama on BookTube, and there's disagreements and controversies and all of that. But in comparison to most communities online, BookTube is overwhelmingly positive and civil and polite. And I think that kind of speaks to this idea that readers, people who choose to spend their time reading and talking about literature, tend to be nicer people. And I mean, I think I've said it before that jerks don't read. And
Right.
like because reading demands that you think about, especially if you're reading fiction. If you're reading fiction, then it demands that you vicariously live through these other characters, that
Right.
you essentially have to be compassionate to appreciate fiction.
Mhm.
Because if you are a complete narcissist, if you're completely self-involved, then you don't see yourself in other characters, in these fictional characters, and it's harder to care about them if you just don't care about other people, if you're completely selfish. And
Right.
so I think that people who read fiction tend to be more compassionate because it's implicit within the form itself. I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but generally speaking, I think that's true. Um,
Mhm.
and with all of that being said, I think, you know, obviously, people who like, most people who are jerks and dangerous don't read as much as people who tend to be kind and polite. But the complete crazy, violent, psychopathic people who are very well read and are very intelligent, I go, isn't that the most dangerous kind of violent person?
Right.
The one who really, really knows what they're talking about and how to manipulate people. Um,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm like, it's a good rule, but you probably don't want to lean on that too heavily.
Right. And I love the fact that there is that qualifier in
Yeah,
there
yeah,
from Lemony Snicket. Yeah, I agree. I had that same passage marked for the exact same reason. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Um, so you obviously have got this section on that I was referencing at the beginning of the podcast on page 100, and then going forward, where Snicket is writing directly to his sister.
Hmm.
And um, maybe I'll save that because I want to hear what you have to say about that. But I just wanted to point out at the very end of this chapter on page 102, at the end of Snicket's letter to his sister, then basically the middle of that paragraph on page 102, it says, from the site of VFD headquarters, I will head straight to the for the hotel denouement. I should arrive by, well, it wouldn't be wise to type the date, but I just put down, that's a good use of the word denouement,
Hmm.
which is like, it's a fancy literary term for falling action.
Right. Yes.
And yeah, I'm just like, yeah, like that seems like where it's heading. That, like, everything to do with Snicket and his sister seems like the denouement of the series. That it's going
Right.
to be the falling action. That first we're going to get everything resolved with the Baudelaires, and once that's all resolved, that's going to be the climax. but then the denouement is going to be the falling action. Now that the climax is over, we have to wrap some things up. So that's where we're going to then get into Snicket and his sister.
Right. Yeah.
That to me is like what seems to be happening here. I just thought that's a good word. It's a good word to use, and I like the fact that it's that's the name of the hotel. So it's not
Right.
it's a word here which means
Right.
he just kind of leaves it. Either you know what denouement means or you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is that is a great inclusion. I love the mention of the Hotel Denouement. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, and so in regards to this whole passage, um, I think that it does work really well, because of course we do have, prior to this, then we have Snicket say, instead you may take a page from, this is on page 99, instead you may take a page from Bruce's book and skip ahead to chapter 6 and find my report on Sonny Baudelaire's tribulations, a word which here means blah, 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 blah. Or you may skip ahead to chapter 7 when the elder Baudelaires arrive at the site of VFD headquarters and unmask the stranger who led them there. And so he gives, multiple reasons for why you should skip over this, because it's like if those are the only things that you're interested in, then yeah, go ahead, skip ahead.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with the, you know, very interesting paragraph on page 100 with this uh, run-on sentence,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Uh-huh. It is.
um, that, yeah, I think that it works really well, and this is one of the instances in the series that I really, really love how it's embedded in there, that there's this other story going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that kids maybe have not like didn't catch some of the more subtle instances where he's using these books as a cover to speak to his sister, that I feel
Hmm.
pretty confident in saying you and I caught the first reference to it, and
Right.
then the next more overt reference, but then this one is just impossible to miss,
Yeah.
that you just have got pages of speaking directly to his sister and him saying, I told people to skip over this section, and
Right.
so it's just you and me here who are
Yeah.
talking to each other. Yeah, it's a really interesting, like, I don't know, device that he's using here.
Yeah. It is, of course, in my opinion, all undone by the fact that he signs this at the end of the chapter. I'm like, who's going to, skip to chapter 6 and then not see that there's a signature on the previous page and just be like, what?
What is happening here? Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, that's also very much in Snicket's character of
absolutely.
every time he
Yeah,
thinks that he's being clever, it's like, it's not as clever as you think.
yeah, for sure. All right, sorry. So, did you have any other notes for chapter 5?
Um, yes, but I want to come back to it later on. So that's fine. We can move on.
Okay. And yes, I did not have any other notes for chapter 5.
Okay.
I guess I'll go first for chapter 6 then.
Sure.
So my first note is on page 106. And oh yes, because we are now dealing with Sunny, I have to get out all my notes here. Because I looked up what some of these words mean. So the first one, on page 106, when Sunny asks Plakna, Plakna, I don't know how to pronounce it, but apparently it is a city in Lithuania.
Oh, okay.
Lithuania is not known for mountains, but it is known for being very cold, from what I understand.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that's what he was going for there, but I feel like maybe.
Hmm.
Freezing mountain? Um, I don't know.
I guess.
Next on page 107, uh, we have Sunny say, toward the top of the page, uh, sneaky talk. I want to say that that's how that would be pronounced. Um, Yeah, Sunny suddenly thought of something that might cheer her up a little bit. Sneaky talk, which sounds like sneaky talk,
Yes,
as a
yes,
as in a way of, sneakily talking about people behind their back.
right.
Uh,
Yes, it
or
is sneaky talk because of what she then says after that.
Yeah. And then moving on to Brummel, Sunny said, um, in my opinion, you desperately need a bath and your clothing is in shambles. So Brummel is a reference to Beau Brummel, who was, according to Wikipedia, an iconic figure in Regency England and for many years the arbiter of men's fashion.
Oh,
So, she's talking about his clothes and mentions a famous.
yeah, so that works.
Yeah,
Because the whole sneaky talk thing, I guess I should mention, she says, of course, because you don't understand me, I can say anything I want to you and you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. So then she
right.
basically turns into an insult comic here.
Yes.
Like that's basically what she's doing.
Yeah,
She's like, "Oh, this is so great," and I'm like, "I guess it's somewhat satisfying to be able to just drop all of these, savage burns on Olaf, and he doesn't
right.
know what you're saying, but ultimately you're still a prisoner of his, and you don't seem to have any way of escaping. So talking back and getting away with it doesn't seem like you're really accomplishing much."
Yeah, for sure. And so my last one here is Bushaney, Sonny said, which meant something along the lines of, "You're an evil man with no concern whatsoever for other people." Now, I'm not the only one who looked this up.
Bush Cheney?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
appears to be a sly dig at those two,
Uh huh.
being
I did not catch that before, but you're
evil
right.
people with no concern whatsoever for other people.
Uh huh. Yeah, Bush Cheney or Bush Cheney.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if people don't know, this is George W. Bush and Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So that works really, really well.
because yeah, like I guess I should mention it just in case people are unaware, because some people might not be aware that when he was writing these books, and George W. Bush was the president, Dick Cheney was
Right.
vice president, and people said that George W. Bush, because of the war on terror, specifically Afghanistan, then really it was Iraq that everybody got pretty upset about, that there was a big reaction against, saying that he's a war criminal and it's all about the oil and all these attacks that were lobbied against him. And so a lot of people said that he was an evil man, and especially Cheney, with no
Right.
concern whatsoever for other people. I mean, I'm not saying that he did it on purpose, but Dick Cheney literally did shoot his best friend in the face.
Right.
That's a thing
Yes.
that happened.
Yep.
It was
And
just birdshot, so the guy was relatively okay.
okay. Yeah.
I'm just saying he didn't
Yeah, I know.
die, but like they, had to pluck it out of it. Like, still,
Yeah. And Cheney also was described as being so heartless that his heart stopped working however many
yeah,
times, right?
multiple times because he's had multiple heart surgeries.
Yes. Again, I don't want to take a stance there, but it is,
Taking a stance either.
yeah, it is
Um,
in the text here that certainly seems to be, uh, I
it's
don't even,
You're right. No, I mean, there's
it's,
no way that's not what's happening here, because
yeah,
it's if these books were written in, you know, like the year 2020, then that would be Trump ends. You know
right.
what I mean? Like, it's just that's essentially what's happening, is because George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, was that administration at the time that he was publishing these books and all the criticism against them. There's no way that's not what's happening here. And I did not catch that until you pointed. But as soon as you got me to stop and pause and look at that, then I went, ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very effective.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Um, all right. So I do have a couple more notes for this chapter. On page 112, this is when we get the description of, Sonny's mother, like the Baudelaire mother, um, and making food. Uh, Let's see, toward the bottom of the page, the luncheon was due to start any minute, and Sonny's mother was quickly mixing up a salad of sliced mango, black beans, and chopped celery mixed with black pepper, lime juice, and olive oil, which,
Mhm.
of course, was mentioned in the previous chapter. as something that I believe, yeah, Lemony Snicket says that he was taught this recipe by his sister.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, just kind of interesting that that's, I don't know. It's a fun little connection at the very
I
least.
just wrote as the Baudelaire's mother, Snicket's sister.
Right. I know. It's just kind of like,
I'm like, is that what you're trying to say? I
yeah,
legitimately don't know.
hmm it is unusual at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, all right. So moving um, on page 115, at the very bottom of the page, the villainous girlfriend turned all the way around to show off her outfit from every angle. Sunny looked up from her cooking and noticed that the letter B was sewn onto the back of it, along with the I insignia. I'm glad you like it, Hugo, Esme said. It's stolen. So, I guess my question to you is, like, I feel like that has to be stolen from Beatrice, right?
Oh.
Because she
Yeah,
had
yeah, yeah.
mentioned before that, that she wanted to steal, or that she was angry at Beatrice
Uh-huh.
for stealing from her. So
Hmm.
this is her type of revenge, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, there's either that or it could be Baudelaire, but I don't really see why you would have the first letter of your last name printed on the jacket.
I
So,
guess it depends on, the person.
right. That's true. Um, but yeah, I certainly feel like that is pointing
Yeah.
to Beatrice.
I agree. I totally agree. That's a good
Uh,
observation.
thank you. Um, all right, and on page 117, this is when we get this whole description of the breakfast that Sunny has put together. Um,
Uh-huh.
I like the nice time Sunny had rinsed her with melted snow, so it would be as clean as. Okay, that's that's not really how that works, but all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was. Oh yes, in this passage, the sentence just before that ends with describing this cold and delicious concoction that is often served at fancy dinner parties and masked balls. And I've pointed out before that Snicket seems very interested in these masquerade parties,
Hmm.
or masked balls, because this is the third or fourth reference that we've gotten over the course of the series.
Yes. Yes. Um, yeah, and I mean it's unsurprising because these books are very concerned with disguises
Right.
and hidden identities and pseudonyms and aliases and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not really surprising. There's also, I don't know if you've got it noted, but since we're on this topic, then kind of the bottom of 119 over into 120, then you have that whole mention of sugar, where one of the white-faced women says that
Right.
the coffee isn't bad, even if it's a little bitter. Could someone pass the sugar, please? Sugar! Shrieked Olaf, erupting in anger. He stood and uh, grabbed one end of the blanket and pulled as hard as he could, scattering all of Sunny's hard work. And then it continues on. Um, yeah, all the sugar in the world couldn't save this terrible breakfast, he roared. But there's been this mention before of stealing of the sugar bowl, which you had reminded me of. And that seems to be
Hmm.
what started all of this business between Beatrice and, am I getting this mixed up? But
Yeah,
between
no, I think that's
Beatrice
right.
and Esme.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, it seems like this is still a sore spot for Olaf, I guess.
right. Yeah, I would say so. And actually, on that note, in the letter that Snicket has hidden
Hmm.
to his sister, then he mentions your suggestion so many years ago at that picnic that a tea set would be a handy place to hide anything important and small in the event of a dark day has
Yes.
turned out to be correct.
Yes.
So once again, then that implies a sugar bowl as part of the tea set.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so very interesting, you know, follow-ups here.
Yeah, I guess they would be little, I mean, for lack of a better word, because I don't really like this term, but Easter eggs.
Hmm.
They're
Yeah,
functioning as Easter eggs for very careful readers who are really trying to find all of these little details. Where they go, oh, that's a reference. Oh, yeah,
yeah,
you mentioned that before. Oh, that connects to the tea set.
yeah,
All of those little things.
yeah. And those are some of my favorite things about these books.
Right. Yeah. Well,
As I'm
it
sure
it
people have picked up on by this point.
yeah, but it rewards rereading. Uh,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
that is typically the sign of a pretty good book. Is it's often hard to tell. I mean, you've got a certain feeling about a book when you read it for the first time, and you might love it, and then you reread it, and then you go, "Oh, it wasn't as good the second time." But then there are some books where you reread it and you go, "Wow, it's so much better the second time." And
Yeah,
those books tend to stand the test of time, because a book that rewards you on rereading is so much more satisfying to spend time with than one that is kind of ruined when it's got a gimmick. You know what I mean?
right.
And then once you know what the gimmick is, maybe a twist ending, then you're like, oh, it's not as good anymore.
Right. Absolutely. Um, all right. So moving on, I do still have a couple more notes for this chapter.
That's fine. It's a really long chapter. It's like 36 pages or something. So,
Yeah. So on page 130, um, the third paragraph there, Count Olaf looked relieved, as if he had not been sure whether the woman was going to compliment him or kick him. Well, it's all for the greater good, he said. And this kind of ties back to what we were talking about with the carnivorous carnival and what's discussed there, where everybody thinks that they're, doing something for the greater good.
mhm.
Um, and so yeah, it's interesting to see Count Olaf sort of shrug off the villainous title for this one brief moment. Because
Yeah.
previously, then he seems to be perfectly happy to define
Yeah.
himself as a villain.
Essentially, twisting his mustache. Ha ha ha.
I
I
think you mean
love
his
being
one
evil.
eyebrow.
Yeah. Twisting his one eyebrow. Ha ha ha! I love being evil. That's
Yeah.
essentially how he's been, just a caricature of a villain, like a cartoonish version of a villain.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
And then on page 133, um, this is a really great discussion that kind of gets ruined by discovering what a verdant flammable device, I think I'm getting that right, is.
uh-huh.
But I guess toward the paragraph that starts around the middle of the page, um, uh, I'll start the paragraph before then. What's the matter? Asked the woman in her deep voice. I thought you liked things that are in. I do, Esme said, and then coughed quite a bit more. Sonny was reminded of Mr. Poe, who was always coughing into a handkerchief, as Esme coughed and finally dropped the green tube to the ground, where it spewed out a dark green smoke. I love cigarettes, she explained to the man with a beard but no hair, but I prefer to smoke them with a long holder because I don't like the smell or taste and because they're very bad for you. And I feel like this is a great description of how many smokers
Yes,
describe their habit as being
yes,
like, you know, oh, well, I know that it's, bad for me and I don't really
right.
like the taste or the smell, but I still like to do it. And it's like, I don't understand.
Because they're definitely getting something out of it beyond the smell, taste, or the health impacts.
Right.
Right? But
Yeah.
yes, no, you are right. I was very puzzled over this, and I'm glad that it got resolved within these chapters of what these things are. Because I'm like, is this supposed to be some kind of like reference to marijuana?
Mm,
That instead of it being, like brown, like tobacco, that it's
right.
green and it's going, I think it's a cigarette, right? And I'm going,
Yeah.
like, that's what I initially thought. And then it seems to be, oh no, that's not what it is at all. Which
Right.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm happy that it's not a reference to marijuana, because if it was a terrible reference. I
Right.
was going, this doesn't make sense. And then I'm like, oh, good, it's not. I'm glad that that's not what I thought it was. That where I thought he was trying to do that, that he wasn't trying to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, good, because if so, it would have not been a very good description.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, so those are my only notes for this chapter.
Okay. Um, All right, so let me get back to the beginning here. So at the very beginning of it, and you don't really, I guess, just kind of follow along with me. Starting at the very beginning of chapter 6, it's on page 103. Then if you just take a look at the actual text, just flip through the pages and notice how dense it is and how we've got very little dialogue for the first, I don't know, half of this chapter. If you look, it's unusual for these books to have really big, long paragraphs that are uninterrupted by dialogue or action tags, action descriptions, or descriptions of the setting. And then when you go through it, what this is the internal monologue, essentially, of Sunny. And because we've never had a chapter, aside from, just 2 chapters ago or 3 chapters ago in this book, we've never had moments like this where we're entirely focused on Sunny. And since Sunny can't speak in a way that is intelligible without somebody like Snicket then saying, this is what she means, acting as her translator, then the only way to move things along, so to speak, and have Sunny puzzle through things and try to come up with a solution here is to basically just describe what she's thinking. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
this chapter is not only much longer, but it's denser than what we've seen with previous chapters because we don't have a lot of
Yeah.
action. We don't have a lot of scene descriptions, and we have very, very little dialogue until the last half of the 30-something page chapter. And it's
Mhm.
because Violet or Klaus are just talking through things. So you have an exchange. It's a discourse where
Right.
her and Klaus are talking about possible solutions of how can we get out of this one. And Sunny occasionally interjects, but
Right.
this is just Sunny, and he has no ability to get her to speak intelligible dialogue in full sentences. So as a result, you have, I think, what ends up being not super interesting passages.
Mm. Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe like you could disagree with my conclusion. You could say it's really interesting being in her head, but ultimately nothing's happening and nobody's interacting with her. It's just her essentially just sitting there, just huh, huh,
Yeah.
for like 15 pages.
Yeah. It's interesting because we had talked about how uh, in the carnivorous carnival, then Snicket introduces, the idea of them eavesdropping
Yeah,
on Olaf, and so this is kind of another out for that, where it's like, okay, well, Olaf isn't going to be with the Baudelaires, so I can't talk about him. Well, then I guess I'll just put one of the Baudelaires with Olaf, who can't really do anything.
right.
And so it's where Sunny is kind of just a placeholder here so
Yeah,
that we're able to get the story of
totally.
Olaf.
I think you're right. As far as a narrative device and a point of view device, she's just utilitarian. Just
Hmm.
if you plunk her there where she gets to observe all of these things, she's effectively acting as an eavesdropper, certainly for the second half of this chapter. But the first
Right.
half of the chapter, he just wanted to say a bunch of stuff. So he
Yeah.
just used Sunny as a device to say a bunch of stuff and then to get us to be able to listen in on what's going on with Olaf and the gang,
Yeah.
because he might have said to his editor, he might have had it in the original manuscript where it was just a chapter devoted entirely to Olaf and Esme. And then his editor's like, you can't do that.
Right.
You've instructed the reader that the only the only events that we get to witness as a reader are events in which the Baudelaires are present. And so then
Hmm.
he's like, fine, I'll just take Sunny, and then she's riding along, and that's my excuse to be able to know exactly what Olaf and Esme are doing at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because, of course, he would have had to make that adjustment to the carnivorous carnival
Yeah.
so that Sunny would be with Olaf and the gang at the end of that.
Yes.
Um, which, based on how quickly these books were churned out, then
Uh huh.
certainly possible.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would love to, I would kind of love to read the version in which Sonny is on board the caravan and uses her teeth to slow it down.
Yeah, I wonder if that was in the original manuscript.
Would not be
And
surprised at all.
the thing is publishing is it works from so far out before you get to publication. The timelines within publishing are really extended, and so it is perfectly reasonable for him to have this book with his editor before the Carnivorous Carnival was published,
Right.
and working through those issues and then saying, then I better change the end of the Carnivorous Carnival.
Yeah.
To then have Sonny go along with Olaf and the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got another point in this chapter, but I actually want to save it. I'm going to do my best to come back to it. So I'll save that one for later. And then on page 126, at the towards the bottom of the page, and it is this word schism that I want to come back to. But anyway, starting with the paragraph that says, before the schism, Olaf said, and Sonny wished Klaus were with her because the baby did not know what the word schism meant. That is a long time ago. That infant must be all grown up by now. Not necessarily, the woman said, and laughed again while her companion leaned down to gaze at Sonny. It's a really good, subtle threat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know how much kids would pick up on that. That was a long time ago. That baby must be like grown up by now, and it's like, ooh, not necessarily. Not if she's dead.
Right, and the fact
and
that
then
they
looking knowingly
at
Sonny is a pretty good little threat. I liked that. I thought that was well done.
Yeah,
because it's subtle.
Yes, I agree, and it's interesting because you can also interpret from that, kind of as we have discussed before, the way that Olaf is portrayed as this childish figure. That he kind of never really grew up.
Yes.
And so you can also look at it that way, where it's like, yeah, the infant, is all grown up, except if they're like Olaf, then they didn't actually really grow up from a maturity level.
That's a good point.
So,
agreed.
But I do think that it is, that it's not that it's your point. But I do like that there's some ambiguity there.
Yeah, there is. You're right. You could read it both ways. All right, and then on page 131, this is I'm surprised that you did not point this out, but this is another instance of Sonny where she says something that is intelligible, but they don't recognize it. And so the middle of the page with the paragraph that starts the two visitors. The two visitors glared down at Sonny Baudelaire, who couldn't help whimpering in fear. Search me, she said. She meant something along the lines of, "I don't have it, my siblings do," but she did not need a translator. That it's not spelled "search me," but effectively it's how you would read it, and it's just one of those, because that is an expression of "search me." Like, I don't have it. Like, beats me. I don't know.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting because that can also be read as like a challenge. Search me. Go ahead.
Yeah.
But I like your interpretation much better.
All right. Now, I guess maybe I'll just keep going with chapter 7, and then I'm going to come back to chapter 6 a little bit.
Okay.
All right. Do you have a lot of notes for chapter 7 and 8?
No, I think I've only got, let me think. Or, see, I think I've got 4 notes in total for the 2 chapters. 4 or 5.
Okay, I'm going to save one of my points for the end here, but I'll just go through a couple. So in chapter 7 at the very beginning, then you have this reference to a novel. So at the very start of the chapter on page 137, Snicket says, an associate of mine once wrote a novel called Corridors of Power, which told the story of various people discussing how the world has become a corrupt and dangerous place and whether or not there are enough people with the integrity and decency necessary to keep the entire planet from descending into despair. So I did have to look this up. I'm familiar with the term, but I didn't know that it was a novel. So it's a novel written by C.P. Snow. You get it? Snow. With like the Snow Scouts and they're in the mountains. Ooh. Yeah. And he wrote this in 1964, essentially about the dangers of nuclear weapons, more or less. It's a political book, but
right. Yeah. So it's interesting because, of course, Snicket does completely miss the not completely miss, but he's just slightly off with his description of, oh, it doesn't need to be actual corridors. It can be any rooms. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't refer to rooms. It's a reference to, like, it's used to describe the people, the actual politicians.
Right.
And so that's just, yeah, another one of those instances of you were so close.
Yes, exactly. And it's another one of those. He calls him an associate of mine, so
Right.
he's friends with every writer ever from all time.
Absolutely.
um, okay, and then on page 146, then you have this mention of theme. So when they're going through I don't know, how did you describe this thing before, the
Uh,
puzzle thing that they're dealing with?
yeah, the vocabulary uh, door lock. Um, I don't remember exactly what it's called either now.
Vernacularly fastened door.
Right. Yes.
Vernacularly fastened door. So when they're dealing with this, then uh, now how did I forget? So how did they like realize that they had to come up with these solutions?
Quigley just knew. He has researched it all.
Okay, fine. On page 146 with their explanation of theme, then it says towards the bottom of that big paragraph um, that Klaus must remember the central theme of the book he had read on his mother's lap. The central theme of Anna Karenina, he said, is that a rural life of moral simplicity, despite its monotony, is the preferable personal narrative to a daring life of impulsive passion which only leads to tragedy. It's a very long theme. The scout said, it's a very long book. Klaus replied, but I can work quickly. And then he continues on with it. And this whole discussion of theme, I think, is interesting because it is functioning as a didactic moment in understanding what literature is and how to appreciate and how to criticize literature and interpret literature and analyze it and just work with it in general. Uh, that, I mean, I've taught English for quite a while, and I can tell you that theme is, I would say, the second hardest thing to teach when it comes to teaching literature.
Mhm.
Um, Teaching students how to identify theme and how to support your interpretation of what the theme is, it's very challenging to do. The only thing that I think is harder than theme is tone.
Right.
Tone is really hard
Yeah.
to teach somebody, and because tone is just one of those things where it's so intuitive that
Mhm.
you kind of know it's scary, but why is it scary, right?
Right.
Or it's funny, but what is it exactly that makes it funny? Or it's romantic, but what makes it romantic and not dramatic? And right, like tone is very challenging, but theme is um, very challenging as well. And so I like the fact that it's showing essentially Snicket is putting this into the book of telling kids a book is not about the plot necessarily. Like the plot
Right.
happens. Then beyond that, there's the story that's happening, but then the meaning, the central message that the author is perhaps embedding into the text, or if you go along with reader response theory, then it's how readers respond to the text, or um, other interpretations that you can pull from it. That So I like it and I dislike it. I like the fact that there's this discussion of theme.
Mhm.
The only thing that I don't like is that there is the theme, which is completely wrong. There is not the theme in a book.
Right. Well, it does say the central theme.
That's still nonsense. If you understand literary theory, then you know that's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
I will absolutely destroy that argument if somebody thinks that it's a very simplistic way of understanding literature, and I find that it's an attitude that a lot of people have where often people will use it as a form of superiority over other people,
Right.
that somebody will read a book and they won't recognize the theme that somebody else recognizes, that most people recognize as the central theme of it, and then they'll say, oh, you didn't get it. And I'm like, no, they just identified something different in the book. But as far
Right.
as the central theme, it's like that. What? How are you going to do? How are you going to calculate that? You're going to say that 62.4% of the prose deals with this theme, but then 32.8% of the prose deals with the secondary theme. Like, it's nonsense.
Yes.
That's not
Yeah.
how literature works. So to say the central theme, even, I disagree. I would. You always have to temper your language. It should be something like one of the central themes, because I'll go with
Right.
that. I'll go
Yeah.
one of the central themes. But to say the central theme, I'm going, ooh, that's an overstatement that high school students make and college students make all the time, undergrads make, but typically that disappears by graduate work. So,
Yeah. So it is interesting because of the way that it's described. How this book in particular, this novel was read to Klaus when he was young.
mm,
There's almost this sense, and the mention of, their father having the uh, verdant flammable devices.
uh-huh.
Um, then, like, clearly the Baudelaires were part of this organization, and it's
Yes,
almost like they were training the Baudelaires for this moment.
you're right. From a plot level, yes,
Yeah.
you're right. But I'm saying the broader discussion about theme,
Hmm.
and this is something that I have fought with my students, because like, the thing is that we were talking about this last week when it comes to Cole's notes or Spark Notes,
Yeah.
that somebody will read it and then Spark Notes is just going to tell you this is what the central theme of Hamlet is,
Right.
and I'm going to say you can't just read somebody else's interpretation and then say, oh, they're right, let me just pull that and then say that's the theme, let me now just regurgitate a bunch of stuff, let me regurgitate what that theme is, because I would say, why do you think it's the theme?
Right.
Identify moments, prove to me how you're seeing that message more than anything else, that's embedded within the text, and how are you justifying it, how are you supporting this? And so I'm saying I like the fact that it's getting kids to think about a theme when they
Hmm.
read. I
Yeah.
like that. I think it's slightly problematic to present it as though there is the central theme. And
Right.
this is a big argument within literary criticism and literary theory, because historically we went much more for, like, it's the modernists and then specifically the postmodernists who have rejected that approach.
Mm.
And there are some who will say, no, 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 you can't take a Marxist approach to this text, or a feminist approach to this text, or a queer theory reading of this text, or a deconstructionist approach to this text. And I go, yeah, they're all valid. They're
Yeah.
all valid. So don't tell me that there's only the traditional way of interpreting something. That
Yeah.
the traditional way of interpreting a text is perfectly valid, but
Hmm.
that doesn't invalidate other readings.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
know that's way, way up here as far as higher order thinking skills and critical thinking and dealing with the text, and these are middle grade books.
Yeah.
uh, but I just need that one extra word, one of the central themes, and then I'm
Yeah.
happy and I have no criticism.
Yeah. Just even just one extra line from Klaus saying, well, there are many, but the
There we go.
one most commonly cited is.
Sure.
That would be
Sure.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or the one that my mom pointed out.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
Um,
even that, nobody would agree with that. Nobody would say, like, the idea that you can get a theme and it's going to be exactly that, that if I
right.
rephrase that, I'm wrong. That
Hmm.
that's where I'm going. It's a problem.
For sure. Do you have any more to say about Anna Karenina?
No,
Okay, because I don't really have much info on it, and so I was hoping
one
that.
of those things of I feel like there's a few texts like that. But it's typically non-English language books. I mean, there's still some English language books where it's like I haven't read it, but it kind of feels like being a film major, you haven't seen Citizen Kane. You know
Right.
what I mean? I'm like, I know enough that I feel ashamed that I don't know that much about it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's basically it. I don't have much to say beyond that. I'm just going, yeah, yeah, I know. I should read it. I know.
Right.
It's one of the
Gotcha.
most, significant texts in literary history, and
Hmm.
going like it would be on many people's top 10 lists for of all time. And I'm
Yeah.
going, yeah, I should probably get around to that.
Right. Yeah, I did look into it a little bit. Um, and yeah, basically all I found was apparently Leo Tolstoy, who wrote
Yes.
it, then he said that this was his first real novel,
Uh-huh.
which is fascinating to think about from Tolstoy.
Right. Right.
Um, all right, do you have any other notes for chapter 7?
I mean, I've only got one, but I'm gonna save that. I think I'll just save it because it's a fairly broad discussion, so I think I want to
Okay.
save it until the end. And I don't have anything for chapter 8, so I'd say you just go for it.
All right. Uh, so one small note on page 139, which is when we first get the description of the verdant flammable devices. Um, it's very interesting here where Quigley pulls out the rectangular box filled with small green tubes, exactly like the one that Sonny had seen the man with a beard but no hair give to Esme Squalor. I like that we get an outright description or an outright callback saying, yes, this is the same device that we
Yes, I
saw.
appreciated that.
Yeah. And then and then Violet says, no, thank you, Violet said. I don't smoke. It's just such an odd moment. I'm guessing it's supposed to be done for humor, like as if this 14-year-old girl smokes, but like I don't know what to do with it.
And it's so funny because it's I feel like it's the size of a cigar.
Right. Yeah.
So it's one thing if you offer like a cigarette to somebody, like to like a teenager, like, hey, you want to smoke? But it's like another thing if you offer just this massive cigar
Right.
without even knowing. I feel like that's the kind of thing that you don't offer to somebody if you don't know whether they smoke or not.
Yep.
You know? um,
Yeah. So that's just a very odd moment.
Agreed. It is supposed to be a joke because it's the other guy who brings it out. The man with no hair and a beard. How is he
Mm.
described? The bearded man with no hair. Is that it?
Uh, yeah, the man with a beard but no hair.
Yeah. Uh, he says, "I think it's a cigarette," and then
Right.
Esme Squalor smokes it and then stops
Right.
because it seems to be that it is not a cigarette, that it is a signaling device. And
Yes.
so it's a funny moment here that Violet is smarter than Esme Squalor because Esme wants to be in and cares about
Right.
what's fashionable and she believes that smoking is in, then she will smoke something even if it's not a cigarette. Um, and so that just shows how stupid she is. But
Hmm.
Violet, whether she identifies it as something that you smoke or not, is just like, I'm not going to smoke this random thing if I don't even know what it is. Like, I don't smoke.
Right.
And then we don't even know, even if somebody, like, she thinks it's a cigarette,
Yeah.
but she doesn't smoke it.
Right. And it is, dark in the cavern as well and all
Right.
that. But yeah. Um, all right. So hopping into chapter 8. I like this description at the beginning of the chapter. It is one of the peculiar truths of life that people often say things that they know full well are ridiculous. If someone asks you how you are, for example, you might automatically say, "Fine, thank you," when in fact you have just failed an examination or been trampled by an ox. He goes on, but that's the gist of it, and I really like that because I feel like most people do fall into that where, somebody's like, "Oh, how's it going?" "Good." And like they don't think about it. They're not actually saying how they're doing or anything like that. It's
No,
just
it's true. It's a form of etiquette. Um,
right. Yeah.
because I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you have somebody where you don't know them very well and they
Yeah.
give you an honest answer and it is unwelcome.
Right.
Like that's so much worse than
Yeah.
I'm like, actually in this case I'd rather you just lie to me. Just
Yeah.
be polite and just say fine thanks.
Yeah.
But sometimes when they're terrible, oh the boss is an idiot and I had this happen and you're just like, oh okay, I kind of have got a busy morning, I don't really want to stop and listen to you complain for however long, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know you. um,
Yeah.
that I'm kind of grateful for the fact that it tends to just be I mean, and most people know it, like not most
Yeah.
people, I would say everybody knows it, that it's just if you want a real answer, typically what has to happen is you have to ask the person a second time to say, no, really, how are
Right.
you?
Yeah.
right? And you only do that, you at least should only do that with close friends.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if a stranger,
Absolutely.
like somebody that I don't know very well at work, asks me like, "Hey, how are you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm good, thanks." How are you? Good. But no, really, how are you? I'm like, "Have we met before?" Why would I start sharing personal details of my life with you?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Um, all right. Uh, yes. And so moving on to page 166, um, then we get this question. But what is the organization? Violet asked. What is VFD? Jacques wouldn't tell me, Quigley said, but I think the letters stand for Volunteer Fire Department. So this is where we seemingly get the actual, not meaning, but what all those letters stand for.
I guess
And
so. Can we
yeah,
trust it at this point?
no. I have to be frank. No, we can't. I think that that's one of the questions that I continued to struggle over as I read through the rest of the series.
Uh-huh.
But it is basically confirmed that that is um, what the letters of this organization are, that they do stand for Volunteer Fire Department. Um, Even though it's not really clear if that's the actual job description of them
Uh-huh.
or if it's just a name that they took on in
Right.
order to disguise themselves. Um, so it's unclear in that respect, at least in the books, as far as I can remember from the rest of the books,
Uh-huh.
that it's still a little bit unclear as to whether or not they were actually a fire department.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I guess I've just gotten so exasperated from this of all of the fake outs. So I'll since we've already got a reference to George W. Bush, then I'm going to use one of my favorite expressions that he said, one of my favorite phrases, because he had so many good ones, where I'm looking at this with VFD and going, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you can't you just can't fool me twice. Because he forgets how it ends, so
right.
he ad libs. You just can't fool me twice. Because he's like,
Yeah.
wait, which way does it go? Is it shame on you? Is it shame on me? I can't. Where am I in this phrase? So you just can't fool me twice. And that's basically my attitude. I don't care anymore. I see
Yeah.
all of these instances of VFD, and I'm like, I don't care, because you just keep faking us out. You keep making us think that we've got it all solved, going back to, I'm pretty sure it was the Vile Village is where we first thought that we had it.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
at least.
Village of Foul Devotees.
Exactly. And yeah, going back at least to that book. So we're several books away from that. And it's just one instance after the other. And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm not going to even keep guessing anymore. Right.
Right. Yeah.
When somebody like fakes you out enough times, right? Like, here you go, never mind. Here you go, never mind. Here you
Yeah.
go, never mind. Most people just walk away. They're
Yeah.
like, well, I'm not going
And,
to play the game anymore.
yeah, and I think that's why when I first read through the series, then I didn't really believe that that's what it actually
That's
was.
what I'm
Because
saying. This is
by
the
because
problem.
by this point I was like, well, it could mean, volunteer feline uh
Detectives.
yeah, detectives. It could mean verdant flammable devices or vertical flame diversion or very fine doilies.
Sure.
It could mean any of these things. And so by that point, then I was just like, okay, I guess maybe, but I don't really believe that. And I'm going to keep going until there's some kind of confirmation. And as far as I recall, there isn't really any confirmation that that's what it is, but it has been
Accepted.
confirmed. Yeah, confirmed outside of the text. Um, yeah, so the other interesting thing about that is that, Violet asked, what is the organization? What is VFD? And Quigley knows what the letters stand for, but he still says that Jacques wouldn't tell him what the organization is. And then even Violet goes off on that. Volunteer Fire Department, Violet repeated and looked at her brother. What does that mean? And then Klaus gives a very specific reference, which is not, a very specific definition, which is not accurate for this context. That it's just, well, but what does it mean?
Right.
You know what the words mean, but that doesn't describe what this organization is.
Right.
Um, yeah, so it's interesting there. Um,
Yeah, because as far as a volunteer fire department, because you have this long discussion about fires as the chapter goes on, and
mm,
essentially the horror of what fire does,
right.
how it destroys, and how it's destroyed their lives, and how the bearded man with no hair and the woman with hair and no beard, how they talk about setting fires, and Olaf is setting all these fires. It's just a series of fires, one after the other, all of this stuff. So then you look at this and you're like, so this volunteer fire department, is that trying to stop people who want to see the world burn effectively? Is that what this means?
Mhm,
Metaphorically and literally, that
right.
some people just want to see the world burn from the Dark Knight. Some men just want to watch the world burn. that
Yeah.
that idea of the evilness in some people and how it takes good people to stop them, and that's what this organization is doing? Or is it the more literal version, like from Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's novel, of they're trained to set fires, to uh,
Mm,
burn places down, right? Because
right.
that's what a fireman means in Fahrenheit 451, is people who go and actually burn things. And you're like, yeah, that actually does seem more like a fireman.
Right.
Because a fireman should
Yeah.
really be a waterman.
Right. Absolutely.
It's kind of weird.
That other job is described by what you prevent.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, we don't call them, like, police officer. Like, we don't call them crime officers.
Right. Yeah.
We call them police officer. To police
Yeah.
people, not to.
Officers of the law, not officers of crime.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. So I'm looking at this, and especially because of all of the wordplay that you have with Snicket, then I'm going,
Mhm.
well, I don't know if it means what I think it means or not.
Right.
It
Yep.
means people who stop fires or people who start fires. And if
Yes.
Olaf has been associated with this and he loves setting fires, and you have this discussion of pyromania and all of that, I'm like, is he somebody who learned all of these skills of how to set fires to places, but now he's doing it in an evil way? Uh,
Hmm.
or is he completely upending what the organization has stood for, where they exist to stop fires, literal fires, and he goes out and starts them? Or is it even more metaphorical, of we need to stop people from burning the world down,
Yeah.
figuratively speaking?
Yeah. Now you're onto the right questions here. Those are not all the wrong questions. Those are all the right questions.
Oh,
At
good.
least in my opinion.
Right. Right.
Um, all right, so I did have one more note, which is on page 174. Um, and this is toward the bottom of the page when Quigley says, I've had plenty of time to do research, Quigley said, but I still haven't found all the answers I'm looking for. I still haven't found Duncan and Isadora, and I still don't know where Jacques Snicket is. Um, and it's interesting because we have gotten this, like Quigley said that, like Jacques was trying to protect him from something, that, oh, it's better if, people don't know that you're alive. And it almost seems like that's why, because Jacques wanted to give Quigley enough time to do all this research and to figure all this stuff out without anybody coming after him.
Oh, okay. That could be.
That's at least like how I read that, and I went, oh, that's really interesting. Because I don't really know why Jacques would, other than like I guess just for Quigley's own safety. But
That's how I interpreted it,
at that time, then the
because,
other Quagmires were at
yeah,
Proof Rock Preparatory,
yeah,
so they weren't really in any danger.
no.
So that's why I'm like, so.
What's Quigley's special skill supposed to be?
That's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Is it supposed to be research? Or
Um,
isn't that what Duncan's special skill is supposed to be?
yeah, let
Because
me
Duncan
think.
wants to be a journalist, doesn't he?
That is correct. Yeah. And Isadora writes poetry, specifically couplets. Um, and Quigley, he has shown, at least in these chapters, and I don't know if this is the broader discussion that you wanted to get to or not, but he has shown such a wide range of skills, more than anyone else. He does not seem to want to specialize in anything
Uh,
that he knows what all these different words mean. He's read all these different books. He has played around with some mechanical devices. Um, yeah, so I don't really know. And he's interested in cartography. Um, so I don't know. He's a man of many talents, I guess.
he's a boy.
I know. That's
Like,
true.
I look at this, and I guess the reason why I didn't think, I'm sure that you're right, or it's quite possible that you're right, that, you know, Jacques Snicket was trying to, stall as much as possible to give Quigley time to do more research. I guess I just look at that. I didn't even think about that because I'm like, why would you get like a 14-year-old to do research?
Right.
I mean, like, it's just a complete waste of time. No offense, 14-year-olds, if you're watching this. Um, I mean, yeah, there's very few on Earth who would be any good at serious research.
Yeah, especially when they don't know what they're looking for.
That's what I'm saying. And then you're just in random people's houses, like just in like
Mhm.
Uncle Monty's house in his library,
Yeah,
like hoping that there's going to be something in his library that would be useful. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, no, it is very odd. But anyway, those are all my notes for these chapters.
Okay. Um, all right. So this is the broader discussion that I wanted to have. So, and I won't take too long with it, but it's just it spans several chapters. So starting on page 148, I think that's chapter 7.
Oh, you had a note from chapter 6, though, correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is I've got notes that go back. They're all
Okay, great.
connected to this, but I want to start here.
Okay.
So, um, I'm trying to see how this paragraph starts. Basically, he's talking about, you know, a daring life of impulsive passion only leads to something else, the scout said. And because they're talking about theme, right? They're continuing off of Anna Karenina. Now, then this is Snicket who's speaking in the middle of that big paragraph where he then says, for instance, if you ever find yourself reading a book entitled The Bible, you would find the story of Adam and Eve, whose daring life of impulsive passion led them to putting on clothing for the first time in their lives in order to leave the snake infested garden where they had been living. And then he continues on with Bonnie and Clyde.
Hmm.
I, big sigh. I don't even know where to begin with this. Uh, that, okay. I guess my biggest qualm with this discussion, and this ties into what we've talked about previously with the series, when it comes to religion in this community, in
Hmm.
this story universe, that I've said there seems to be no religion. And
Right.
then even when, like, there's really no mention of churches, there's no mention of praying, there's no mention of people of faith, of different religions, of God, any conception of God or the devil, or a sense of theology, a way of understanding the universe through a spiritual practice or a spiritual way of being, spirituality in general. There's just no discussion of spirituality. And then the
Right.
only reference that we get to it is the ritual that you have, the coming of age ceremony within Judaism of having a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah.
Hmm. Yeah.
That and that's it, and that's the only one that he speaks about in a way that's not disparaging. Because then he does take a shot at Catholics. In
Yeah, there is one brief mention at, in the first four chapters of this book where he says that he could only pray that the batteries in his flashlight did not run out. But
oh, okay,
it's not
it
a
sounds like an expression, not an actual prayer.
yeah, yeah.
That So I guess my point here would be looking at that passage that, okay, we actually get an overt reference to the Bible.
Hmm.
even the way he introduces it, though, he says, for instance, if you ever find yourself like, oh, I just found myself, it wasn't intentional, just I happened to be doing it. If you ever
Right.
find yourself reading a book, just a book, not a holy text, not really, certainly within the Western world, the most significant book in history within the Western world,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Um, and you can certainly make the argument that it is the most significant book in history, but it is not just a book, it is a series of books, right? It means the little books, the Bible itself. So he gets it all wrong, for one thing,
Yep.
calling it a book and not a religious text or anything like that. You would find the story of Adam and Eve, whose daring life of impulsive passion led them to putting on clothing for the first time in their lives in order to leave the snake infested garden where they had been living. Uh, okay, I guess because there's so many problems with this, the one that I want to focus on is the fact that there is this omission of God in that
Right.
entire thing. There is no reference to God. He is making the Bible sound like a purely secular text,
Right.
that it's not a
Yeah.
religious text. It should have no impact on your life. If you read it, it's just like any other book. Then there's just some random stories in there. And you might read it like you would read any other book. He seems to be going out of his way to make it seem like just another book and not that
Mhm.
it's something significant. And whether you are a Christian or not, whether you are Jewish or not, whether you are Muslim or not, and your holy text is the Quran. You know what I mean? That like to have somebody like, because I would not describe the Quran as a book, just a regular old book where you might find
Right.
stories. I'm not Muslim, but I would say it's a holy text. And for people,
Yeah.
like for Muslim people, then that's not just any other book. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, and but it's staggering to me that he omits a reference to God,
Right. Yeah.
that there is no mention of God in this story universe. And that seems really strange. And so that's where I want to jump into a couple of these other references, because it comes up in strange ways. Because if you're looking at page 126 with this word schism, then the middle of that page of 126, the woman with hair but no beard nodded. Infant servants are so troublesome, she said. I had an infant servant once a long time ago before the schism. Before the schism, Olaf said. And of course, there's been a schism within their organization. But if you know enough about history, then you know, like, there's the Great Schism. And the Great Schism was within Catholicism, where they had, for lack of a better description, there is a better description, but my comedic way of describing it is too many popes. They had
Right.
they had multiple popes who were saying,
Yes.
no, 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 I am the rightful pope. No, 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 I'm the rightful pope. Or the schism within the Christian church in general, of Protestantism splitting off from Catholicism, of we protest the Catholic Church. Like, that's what it means to be a Protestant, is to protest the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
in the most literal definition of it. So that's a great schism within the church. It went from a unified church, because Catholic means universal. Everybody belongs to it. Catholicism is available to all. That's literally what Catholicism means. And then you have, so universal, and then we protest the universal, right?
Right.
So then I'm going, that's a schism. And then I'm going, so you're taking a word that really has got significance within religious history, but you're removing it from the religious argument, and you're now turning it into a secular word. Your
Mhm.
usage is a secular usage. Your reference to Adam and Eve is a secular reference to Adam and Eve. Your reference to the Bible is a secular reference to the Bible. And then going back even further on page 99, and I think this is chapter 5, and it's the middle of page 99 with the sentence that starts instead, and it says, instead, you may take a page from Bruce's book and skip ahead to chapter 6 and find my report on Sonny Baudelaire's tribulations. A word here, a word which here means opportunities to eavesdrop while cooking for a theater troupe. Whew. You know what tribulation, like where that word comes from, right?
I, I believe it comes from what happened to Jesus Christ.
Jesus uses it, but it's how Jesus describes the end times. And then it
Oh,
gets used
okay.
again in
Yeah.
Revelation. So
Mm.
that is like the time of tribulation, the great
Right.
tribulation.
Yeah.
So it's another word from the Bible that he's now turning into a secular word, and in fact defining it in a way that completely ignores the
Right.
religious significance of it. So I'm going, just in these 4 chapters, you've got 3 significant instances of removing, of taking something that is very closely tied to spirituality and then secularizing it. And I'm
Hmm.
going, as far as parents potentially having problems with their children reading this book, if you've got, fairly religious parents of any faith, I
Hmm.
imagine they would have a problem if they listened to me describe this.
Right. Yeah.
That he's,
At the very least, any Abrahamic religions.
yes.
Yeah. Um,
But I mean,
yeah.
even, yeah, exactly. Any Abrahamic religions.
Yeah.
And I mean, so then beyond that with tribulations, it's also interesting that he uses this word because, um, and I don't know whether he's doing it intentionally or not, but John Wyndham's book, The Chrysalids, which is one of the greatest sci-fi novels ever. I absolutely love that book, and it's now sort of considered YA, but it was before young adult existed. But I've told you before. I've insisted that you have to read The Chrysalids,
Right.
and it's post-apocalyptic fiction. It's set thousands of years in the future, at least 1,000 or so. It's unclear, right? Because you don't know. But the world has been destroyed by nuclear warfare, and now you have mutations in the population, right? And it's taking place. It's set in Newfoundland, or I guess Labrador, and if you get too close to like you know the mainland of North America, then things just become more and more deviant,
Mm.
and like things don't grow right because of all the nuclear fallout.
Okay.
And but they describe the tribulation, and the tribulation was essentially the entire world was engulfed in flames. So I'm
Mhm.
going, is that like what you're trying to do here? Like, because it's a very religious community, so that's why they think that's what the end times is from Revelation, that it's like the tribulation, that it's like
Gotcha.
when the world was covered in fire, which isn't how it's described in Revelation. But
Yeah.
it, I'm going, you have this whole discussion about fire and the terror of fire. Is this some kind of reference by invoking the word tribulation to Wyndham's The Chrysalids? I doubt it, but
Mm.
it's an interesting connection.
That
So
is really interesting. When I read tribulations, then my mind instantly went to the expression of, trials and tribulations, um,
yes,
which, yeah, hmm, that's really interesting, though.
because it should be tribulation with a capital T,
Right.
is what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
biblically speaking. But he's secularizing it. Tribulation doesn't have to. It can of course be just a general time of suffering, just lowercase, not a specific historical moment, like from prophecy, a prophetic era in time.
Right.
Um, but um, I don't know what else to do with it. I'm kind of I just feel like to, I guess I'm reluctant to take this reading, but I find it hard not to take this reading. That it feels as though Handler has got an axe to grind with
Right.
religion. It feels like he's trying to make a point, that he's trying to make it seem as though the Bible is just any ordinary book. There is no God. There's no reference to the afterlife. There's no reference to praying, to a life of spirituality, being a spiritual person, uh, any kind of faith system, like
Hmm.
that. And that's fine, but then to like, it's fine to just not have any reference to religion whatsoever, to have a completely secular society where nobody talks about religion whatsoever. It's not realistic, because that's never happened at any point in human history where people
Right.
have not had some sense of spirituality. We have always had a sense of spirituality,
Yeah.
even though you have more, like, certainly we have more atheists than we've ever had before, secular humanists and all of that, but they're still the minority worldwide.
Right.
And so I look at this, and it just seems like, why would you mention it in a secular way?
Right.
I just don't know why there's a reference to it, and equivocating that, like, not equivocating, but making it seem as though the Bible is equivalent to Bonnie and Clyde. They're the
Right.
same. They're just
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
That even if you believe that, and I have no issue if somebody wants to believe that, but even if you do believe that, don't. I take issue with the fact that you're putting that into a middle grade book.
Hmm.
Um, like, I would just, like, don't say the Bible is just any ordinary book,
Right.
uh, and bury it in the text like that. Um, like, you
Hmm.
can do it. I don't know that this is coming across the way I want it to. It's that I'm saying
You,
nobody is buying these books thinking, oh, these are secular books that are going to secularize religious stories or biblical stories, that it's a
right.
surprise, that he's hiding it in the middle of the book in a small little passage, and that I imagine for many parents, they would look at this and say, you know, a person of really any religious background would say, I don't like, even if you're not religious, I still don't think you should just call the Bible just any ordinary book and remove God from it.
Yeah, it's really. We had talked about this before, where there are these levels of removal um, that Handler is able to achieve with these books you know, because they are being written by Lemony Snicket, and it is in this, you know, this different universe,
Yes.
this very different universe,
Yeah.
and so you I could see the point being made, and I don't, you know, I don't really agree with it, but there could be the point here that in the universe of these books, then there is no God, and that
That seems obvious.
even the Bible in this universe would be, not a religious text, but like that there would be no reference to God in the Bible, which I don't really know how that would work.
I hear what you're saying, but you can tell that it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
it's an absurdity.
yes. Yeah,
That I'm saying
absolutely.
there
Yeah.
seems to be no churches in these books. There's no religious people. There's no
Mhm.
mention of spirituality. So why are you mentioning the Bible?
Right.
That's my point. Is I'm saying I'm okay if if these books remain entirely secular, where there's
Yeah.
just no mention of God or church or spirituality whatsoever, and then you just tell the story of the Baudelaires and Lemony Snicket and all that. That's fine. That's
Hmm.
fine. Or you could have books that are overtly secular, taking biblical stories, but saying we're going to remove all mention of God, and we're going to, like, take away any sense of spirituality from these stories. If you sell books like that, then that's perfectly fine, where parents can then make an informed choice whether they want their children to read that book or not. Because I have no issue if somebody wants to sell those books. But I'm saying these books are posing as, potentially dangerous books because there's miserable, woeful things happening within them. But then I'm
Hmm.
going, ooh, but they have these weird references to sexuality within the books
Right.
that you don't read these books because there's going to be some weird references to sex. And there's not a warning of, hey, don't read these books if you are a religious family and you're sensitive about the fact that I'm going to say the Bible is just an ordinary book and that there is no God, that I would just remove God's, like, involvement in the story of Adam and Eve. I won't mention that, or the devil, that there is no
Right.
God, there is no Satan. But
Yeah.
that's
Instead,
effectively what
there
he's
is a
done.
garden infested by snakes.
Yeah. I That's where it feels like a Trojan horse. They're
Mm,
posing as something fairly innocuous,
right.
but inside, I think for most people, most parents would look at this and go, I don't like that. And some parents would have no issue with it whatsoever, right?
Hmm.
I, I'm not saying that people have to feel a certain way. I just don't like the fact that he seems to be hiding the actual um, uh, subversive elements in these
Right.
texts. Like he's not giving warnings about those things, and uh,
Mm.
I just don't get it in a fictional universe where there is no religion or spirituality or churches. Why he would then mention the Bible and then take the story of Adam and Eve and not mention God or the devil and screw up the story?
Right.
Why
Yeah.
would he do that unless he wants to confuse children? And so kids who are going to Sunday school, kids who have been taught certain things by their parents, and now they read this and they go, well, I love these books and he's so smart and I want to be smart like the kids in these books. And you see what I'm saying? That's where I'm looking at
Yeah.
this going, ooh, I don't think I like that. It
Right.
feels like an adult, you know, coaxing children over to whisper things to them that you don't want the parents to hear.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a fair and uh, I think not just fair, but a genuine uh, criticism
Right.
and concern
Yes.
regarding these books.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
mean, like I like I have really I've said it multiple times on the podcast that I have essentially I'm very open-minded when it comes to art and literature, and I appreciate all kinds of different things. I mean, the Last Temptation of Christ, which completely denies the divinity of Christ, like, or at least the sacrifice of him, and all, like, I mean, if you know anything about the Last Temptation of Christ, it's like, oh yeah, I've watched that. Like, I have no issues with it. And then, the Passion of Christ, sure, I've watched that. I have no
Right.
issues with it. Like, I don't care. You can do whatever you want if you're showing your hand, if you're saying this is what the
Mhm.
text is going to do,
Right.
and it's for adults who can make their own decision whether they want to consume that, whether they want to fill their minds with that, or whether they want to avoid it. That's perfectly
Yeah.
fine. But this is not saying to kids or to parents, we're going to mention the Bible, we're going to remove God from it. Because I go,
Right.
yikes, that's crazy that, like, you're going to do that. Like, it's fine to do it, but it's not fine to do it in children's literature and not give a warning that you're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, it's a great point. Um, all right. Well, unless you have more to say, then I think we'll move on
Sure, we'll move
to the
on.
next five chapters,
Yeah.
which is practically half the book.
Yeah.
It's it's really quite unusual. Uh,
Yeah. I'm interested in the structure of this because you're right. We're 8 chapters in, and we've only got 5 to go, but the remaining 5 are almost half the length of the book. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll move on to that for next week. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Feel free to comment on any of the stuff that we talked about below, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.